Are you ready to listen to my dad Joe and Uncle Justin talk about sports? Now on with the show.
The Joe Mays and J-Raff Show is brought to you by Mays Sandwich Shop, which have been serving the greater West Lawn area delicious food for over 70 years. You are listening to the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show.
Boring.
A weekly podcast about sports since 2011.
Don't you ever get tired of being wrong all the time?
With a focus on football.
Kansas City 31, San Francisco 20. Mahomes takes the snap. He's just going to throw it long for Demarcus Robinson. It is going to use up all the time. The game is over, and the Chiefs' kingdom has firmly planted its flag on top of football's highest summit. The Kansas City Chiefs are champions of Super Bowl 54.
Now, here are your hosts, Joe Mays and Justin Raffoff. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show, live with episode 305, talking 2020 NFL Draft. And it's going to be a good one, as always. And joining me, co-host Justin Raffoff via the Mays Sandwich Shop hotline. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Yeah, it's good to be here, and still doing this virtual thing, but hey, it's working.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we had a big show a couple weeks ago relating to the NFL Draft. We did it live on Thursday night with the first round. And it was nice to hear a lot of people ask if we were going to be doing the second and third rounds on Friday night, but that just wasn't in the cards with a bunch of other things going on. And we weren't here on the regular show last week, but we did have a show about the Wilson football team on the Bulldog Hour, the second episode of season 6. So we've been busy, but we wanted to make sure that we came back and talked a little bit more NFL draft here this evening. We wanted to wrap up how our teams fared. Eagles, Cowboys, Dolphins, Patriots, Ravens, Steelers, all the ones that our listeners are interested in. We wanted to make sure we talked about. And I'm not sure there's a bigger discussion point than the one surrounding, the local team, your Eagles, because they made a surprising pick in the second round, and I know we're going to talk a lot about the Philadelphia draft. So do you want to start right there and jump right into it?
Yeah, we might as well. We might as well start with the Eagles. So, so when we look at the Eagles, like you said, I would kind of go back and argue that obviously the biggest surprise was that second round pick at number 53 when they took Jalen Hurts, a quarterback, which has lots of questions, which we'll get into. But at the same time, there were also questions about their first round pick when they took Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson, who is still available from LSU. When you look at it, the Reagor thing, I was surprised just because everyone assumed they were going to take, I shouldn't say everyone. I know people were talking about them taking Jefferson if he was available there, and he was. The things that made that a little more difficult, I think, were the fact that CeeDee Lamb was available much later than people thought, and he went to another team, which we won't mention till later.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going to mention him eventually.
Right, yeah. So, I think that really turned people, because people feel, they wouldn't trade to get up there. It's not that simple all the time. And, you and I were talking about this when we were live, chatting during when we were broadcasting during the draft. Lots of teams will sometimes say, everybody's like, the Eagles should have jumped up in front of Dallas and got CeeDee Lamb. Well, we don't know that Cowboys hadn't already said to the team, hey, look, if the Eagles call, let us match. I'm not saying they did, but you don't know. There's so many things going on in those back channels of the draft that it's impossible to know that they could have jumped up and gotten CeeDee Lamb, although it looks enticing, and that would have been awesome. However, Jalen Reagor, I'm pretty sure NBC Sports Philly put out an article a couple weeks ago just saying how, Jalen Reagor is flying up the Eagles, draft board, because they really like his tape and they think he's a really good fit. So, when I see an article like that out of Philly, when they took him, yes, I was surprised, but I wasn't that stunned. And I know, and this is one of those things where, I hope it's true, but I've seen it lots of places. Lots of people were saying, yeah, he didn't run a great 40 at the combine. However, and again, virtually everyone has said this, he plays and ran a much faster 40 at his simulated pro day. He didn't really get a pro day. But they also say when you watch his game speed, his tape, he plays much faster than the 40 that he ran. So I don't have a problem with that, especially when you look at the issues they have or had at wide receiver last season. They went out and got a wide receiver. They got a speedy guy. I can't really complain about that. I was hoping they would go with the bigger wide receiver and then draft KJ Hamler in the second round, but KJ Hamler wasn't around for that pick number 53. So that wouldn't have necessarily worked out either. You know what I mean? So I'm okay with the Reagor pick at round one. I know there were some issues with drops and things like that. The Eagles have had issues with drops. When you look at Wentz's numbers, it's insane because the Eagles had dropped so many balls. It's unbelievable. But you hope that's something you can work on. But at the same time, you look at his numbers. Well, TCU wasn't very good this past year. And so, I look at it, if you put Jalen Reagor on LSU, yeah, he's putting up monster numbers too, So I don't worry about that part of it as much. When we get to round 2 and the Jalen Hurts pick, I was really mad at first. And I still don't necessarily agree with the pick. However, the more I look at it, it's probably me just talking myself into it. But the more I look at it, I'm like, okay, I understand. There were a couple different things. One, I try and look at it as someone brought up the point that this looked like Jeffrey Lurie went to them and was like, look, if we had a real quarterback, we would have won a playoff game last year, at least a playoff game. Well, you could make that argument. If we had a real backup, that could have been the case. However, there were backups available last year and you didn't go out and get them. So I don't know that I really buy that. I understand that you want to make Jalen Hurts, into something here, but how are you going to do that? I know I think the Taysom Hill comparison is a little lazy because he's not Taysom Hill, really in any way other than he's a good athlete. I don't have a problem with you taking a flyer on the guy who was the runner-up for the Heisman and has, led his team to a national championship, and he's been incredible. However, that second round, honestly, if they would have gotten him in the third round, now, based on everything we saw, he probably wouldn't have been around in the third by the time they picked at 103. I know there was some shifting around, but I feel like this is a huge insurance policy, no matter what the Eagles say about it. And if that's the case, if you have that many doubts about Wentz, which I do not, but I understand, but if you have that many questions about Wentz, then how do you give him $100+ million contract? That's what I kind of come back to. One of the interesting things, is everybody feels like Wentz has missed more games than he actually has.
Yeah, I was a little surprised at how few he's actually missed. It was just a handful at the end of a couple seasons, and then the playoff run, obviously going to the Super Bowl, which sticks out like a sore thumb. But overall, he hasn't missed a ton of time.
No, he really hasn't. And I saw some of the stats, and I can't find them right now. But I saw something like, he's missed, I think, 8 games through 4 years, which isn't a lot. When you think about he tore his ACL at the end of an MVP type season, right? So he tore his ACL. So we always talk 9 months is early. They brought him back too early from that because, and this is an important thing that a lot of Eagles fans I feel like people are starting to come to grips with this pretty well, but Nick Foles played himself out of the starting job the next year. Like, that's why they rushed Wentz back, was because the offense was stifled the first few weeks. Now, that's not all Nick Foles. They lost, and this is a key, and I think this was the bigger key that gets overlooked by a lot of people outside of Philly, is that they lost their top 2 offensive minds outside of the head coach to other coaching positions. One went and became the offensive coordinator in Jacksonville, I believe, and the other went and became the head coach in Indianapolis. If not, the other guy might have gone. No, he went to Minnesota. He went to Minnesota and was the offensive coordinator there. Sorry. But then he got run out by Zimmer the next year, and then he went to Jacksonville. But so all of a sudden you have Groh, who's calling. Yes, who was the quarterback's coach for the Eagles and was a great fit there. And I know it didn't work out with Minnesota or in Jacksonville, but Jacksonville has one of those things where they can't really get it out of their own way. But you look at some of the other issues, like, so all of a sudden you have Groh, who really had no, in my opinion, he found himself in a spot where he was in trouble. He was in over his head, in my opinion, and the offense has not been what it needed to be the last year and a half or 2 years. Super inconsistent and things like that. So all that being said, I thought the Jalen Hurts pick was a little questionable in the second round. We'll wait and see. I know I just said, Wentz hasn't missed as many games as people think, but he still missed on average 2 games a year. Now, that's kind of funny because he played every game his first year and every game this past year. Now he got knocked out of the playoff game. But that, the playoff one, I still look at that as like a freak accident kind of thing. That's something that just happened because it's football. That's not because of anything that's really in control, because people are like, oh, he was running. Yeah, but like the offensive line was pretty bad. Or on that play was not doing very well. I kind of wish they would have, maybe if they weren't going to go double down on wide receiver, I kind of wish they would have gone defense in the second round, just because they were so, I don't know. There's just lots of question marks. The draft could turn out really well for the Eagles. Like Jalen Reagor in a high-flying Eagles offense could be like, when you look at the weapons the Eagles could have, it could be a pretty dynamic offense. And imagine if you've got speed and you've also got Deshaun Jackson lining up somewhere else, and you got the Eagles got a lot faster, and that's great. John Hightower, who they got in the 5th round, I like that pick at wide receiver. I'm hoping he can compete for some of those other spots. The problem is when you look at all the guys that they've been bringing in at wide receiver, they drafted 3, and they brought in some, undrafted free agents. What's that tell you about the guys they've drafted the last couple of years?
Right. It hasn't panned out.
But right now, again, I am willing to give some of those guys still a shot because I think Groh was more of a problem, and he didn't develop the young guys like he didn't. I go back to when we talked to Chad and how he just talks about how Andy Reid like coaches and he's constantly making guys better, and he's constantly giving you new stuff and all those things. I don't want to give the guys a pass. Like some of the Eagles guys have been absolutely awful, but at the same time, like, coaches need to put their guys in positions to be successful as well, and the Eagles haven't necessarily done that. So I like that they addressed the need at wide receiver, even though it's not necessarily the conventional way that a lot of people thought they would. They took 2 Auburn offensive linemen. They drafted a linebacker. I like that they drafted the safety out of Clemson, who's a huge Brian Dawkins fan.
Yes.
And Brian Dawkins, went out publicly and was already like, Philly, you're going to love this kid. Give him a shot. So while the Eagles draft score is a little low because of the questionable picks a little early on, I think there's room for it to grow. I don't think you're going to – it's incredibly unlikely that we look back and like, oh, man, they got a steal or they made a great pick at every round. That doesn't happen. But if you go back, if you get 4 solid guys out of this class, that's not too bad. I guess 4 solid. If you get a dynamic playmaker and 4 good ones, then you would hope you're good. The problem is when you draft a quarterback in the second round, you're like, all right, well, that doesn't help us this year already. So now we're just like forfeiting that pick. So that's the only real issue I have. But we'll see. I like the upside of a lot of it, but I feel like they left some on the table.
Yeah, I agree. They had probably maybe the biggest shock-inducing pick of the entire draft, was that the Hurts pick in the second round. But I do like a bit what they did. I thought Rager was an interesting one over Jefferson and a few of the other receivers that were possibly out there. When CeeDee Lamb went late and at 17 to the Cowboys, we just kind of felt that it had to be Jefferson when the Eagles pick came around. And when he was still on the board and Philadelphia was on the clock, it seemed to be too obvious, and apparently it was. Because when Jalen Reagor was announced, I was very surprised. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't a good pick. It was just a little bit surprising based on what we had seen. But it's interesting that he'll get to overlap his tenure with Deshaun Jackson, because they're quasi-similar, especially when they can take the top off defenses and their field stretchers, and that usually makes the rest of the wide receiver group better when you have someone like that. And that was a missing link with the Eagles offense last year with Deshaun Jackson injured for so much of the time. So I like the Rager pick. The Hurts one is, I see both sides of it. I understand it, but like I've also seen a lot of people say is like, yeah, you do need a nice backup in the NFL when you have a quarterback that has been beat up a little bit here and there and has missed, a handful, not even 2 handfuls of meaningful games in the first, full 4 or 5 years of his career. But if he would step in and have success, now what do you do? So, it's one of those things. I guess we'll deal with it if we have to deal with it. But it mirrored my reaction to the early pick, or the day 1 pick, the Thursday night pick with the Packers trading up to get Jordan Love. It seems to bring a lot of unnecessary controversy, and you could have used that pick to help win now. So, but I do see both sides of that. I do like a few of the Eagles' other picks. I love the Wallace pick, 127th overall, and you get a versatile defender, multi-year starter, and someone that has played against a solid FBS competition and been in the playoff a number of years with Clemson. And he idolizes Brian Dawkins. There's a lot of similarities there. So I think Wallace will be an impact player in the years to come in Philadelphia, and I think he has the good chance to play very meaningful games this fall for the Eagles. And I do like the very late flyer on the tackle from Auburn, Prince Tegawanogo. I like him. I think that's a solid depth addition. I think he could surprise some people. But, I feel like it wasn't a poor draft. It was a little surprising. But,
Right.
I'm sure a lot of people were left scratching their head when you could have gotten maybe an impact defender or even a second wide receiver with the 53rd overall pick, and they went with a backup quarterback.
Right.
But hey,
exactly.
if they are able to, even if they don't have the same style of play, if they're able to figure out a role similar to Taysom Hill, or like I've seen other people
Right.
mention, grooming Lamar Jackson the way they did at the beginning. But I mean, they were grooming him to take over, and that's not what they're doing with Hurts. So I don't know exactly if there's a direct correlation there, but overall solid, if unspectacular. But you know, if Rager shows this year that he is worthy of a first round pick and he is taking the top off defenses, I don't think Philadelphia is going to even worry about what Jalen Hurts is doing. If Rager shows
Right.
what he can do, and the guys stay healthy, even though that has no reflection on the rookie class, if the Eagles are pushing for the division, winning a playoff game, it really isn't going to matter. I don't think anyone's really going to be talking too much about Jalen Hurts. Of course, if something related to Wentz occurs, that's a different story.
Right. But here's part of the issue too. I don't think any of them look at Jalen Hurts. I haven't seen anybody that's like, oh, Jalen Hurts is ready to play quarterback in the NFL right now. That's why he wasn't a first round pick, and that's why he's kind of like in that next level of quarterbacks and all that stuff. He's very good, and the potential's there. You could see it in his growth from his time as a freshman at Alabama until last year at Oklahoma. Like he's grown a lot, and he works, and everything about him has been great. Like it's not Jalen Hurts isn't the issue. It's the Eagles taking him in the second round at 53 when they have other needs. And the one thing is, I saw Howie Roseman say, we had talked about this scenario with Wentz, and we told him like, hey, look, I promise if we do this, I promise I'll go out and get you everything. We'll go out and get as many weapons as we can. I'd be like, so is that implying that if we don't do this, you weren't going to do that? Like, isn't that your job anyway? Like, you look at last year, I know they were decimated by injuries, but like last year was partly a failure in terms of the front office, because like they were left in a playoff game running out practice squad quarterbacks at wide receiver, and it wasn't like the issue came up weeks before that. So like, yeah, that's unacceptable. And then to go out and not use, or to use a second round pick, not to help somebody who can help you all the time. Like, it's just, when you look at like Taysom Hill's snap count is not that high. You know what I mean? And you look at a second round guy and you're drafted, even if he is a Taysom Hill type role, especially to start, like you're drafting a guy who max has a few snaps a game. Like that seems odd in the second round when you should be aiming for a guy that's going to play a lot, in the second round. So it was an odd pick.
Right.
The Jalen Reagor thing, interestingly enough, I had actually looked at a couple different things where I had seen him going late in the first round, even though people thought that might be a bit of a stretch, just teams looking for wide receivers in those spots and based on the wide receivers that were left. So, I saw some Eagles fans who were like, they should have taken Reagor at 53. Reagor was not going to be around at 53, in my opinion, even though that was closer to where his draft grade may have been. I think he may have still gone on Thursday night if the Eagles didn't take him. I don't know that, but I just feel like while a bit of a stretch, I don't think it's as big of a stretch as it necessarily gets viewed just strictly looking at it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get it. I think that's a real possibility. But I don't want to just talk about the Eagles tonight. So let's talk about the team that shall not be named by Eagles fans, the Dallas Cowboys. We have to talk about them because, unfortunately, for those of you that bleed green. Dallas had on paper a phenomenal draft. They did a great job finding value at areas of need, which is generally what you're hoping to do. They allowed the board to play out perfectly, and maybe they drafted a few positions that weren't highest priority, but the value of the players that were left available when they picked, you couldn't pass up, and they didn't. And none bigger than their first pick, number 17 overall. Thursday night, we heard the Cowboys take CeeDee Lamb, the wide receiver from Oklahoma. And, wide receiver wasn't at the top of their list. They had just re-signed Cooper. And Michael Gallup has had a strong early part of his career. But, there's definitely a subtle need there. But when you have someone who you had, according to Jerry Jones, 6 on your board, available at 17, and you want to shore up the offensive side just because it's become such an offensive focused league, and you still have young talent at quarterback, running back, and a pretty solid offensive line, you couldn't pass that up, and they didn't. They jumped on Lamb, which we talked about live Thursday, almost 2 weeks ago with the first round of the draft.
Yeah.
As CeeDee Lamb has fallen, after we saw Judy and Ruggs go, and CeeDee Lamb is still sitting out there. And we said, do the Cowboys take him? Could the Cowboys take him? I mean, they're not going to trade with the Eagles to allow the Eagles to take him. Could the Eagles trade up in front of them? Because he's not getting past Dallas, is he? And that's exactly what happened. So a great pick right there. And then they did the same thing in the next round. Now, this was a higher area of need for the Cowboys, was defensive back. And a few other cornerbacks went earlier that many draft experts felt were a bit of a reach. So Trayvon Diggs from Alabama fell. The Cowboys scooped him up. Excellent pick. Same thing with their pick in the third round, 82 overall. Oklahoma's Neville Gallimore, a stud defensive lineman, just sitting there for the picking. They doubled down at cornerback, getting Reggie Robinson from Tulsa next. And then 2 more excellent picks from Dallas in the offensive guard from Wisconsin, Tyler Biadasz, who I liked for Miami. I was hoping Miami could possibly land him in the middle to late rounds, but Dallas took him. And then also an edge rusher from Utah, Bradley Anae, which was another guy that was pretty high up and thought pretty highly of for a variety of draft people. And then an interesting one, just for our sake, because I know I texted this to Justin when it happened. The Cowboys' final pick was Ben DiNucci. Maybe it doesn't ring a lot of bells for many people. He was quarterback at James Madison, but before he was at James Madison, he was at Pitt. And why is that significant? Well, he was the quarterback for Pine Richland when they played our Wilson Bulldogs in the, at the time, Western State Final in December 2014. Wilson was winning that game into the fourth quarter and just couldn't hold on against one of the most talented teams in the state. Ben DiNucci's Pine Richland team would go on to play St. Joseph's Prep in the final that year, and it would be a huge shootout that St. Joe's Prep would win. And I believe a member of that team was DeAndre Swift, who was drafted in the second round by the Detroit Lions. So,
I think I sent this to you later on, but that St. Joe's, well, I shouldn't say that St. Joe's Prep team, but St. Joe's Prep had 3 kids drafted this year. That's pretty amazing. With DeAndre Swift, John Reed, and I'm missing one of them, but
yeah, I can't remember who the third one is.
John Runyon Jr., I think.
Oh, yes, you're right. Yep, that's who it was. So, yeah, just an interesting tidbit there. But I mean, the Lamb going back to Dallas, the Lamb, Diggs, Gallimore, Biadasz, and Anae, like all those to me were great value picks, positions of need, building blocks for the future of your team. Yeah, I don't know a lot about Reggie Robinson. And Ben DiNucci is just a name to me. And with them signing Andy Dalton, I don't know if DiNucci will stick around. He may be destined for the practice squad at best. But just a great selection from Jerry Jones. Whether or not he used input from his scouting department or not, who knows. But great picks from the Cowboys in 2020, which you as an Eagles fan can't be happy about. Dallas may have their issues, salary cap wise and signing people long term. And there's always going to be people that don't think Dak is the answer, both in Dallas and elsewhere. But with a new coaching staff down there and the offense that they've assembled, and if they are able to find a couple defenders to step up or stay healthy, I think Dallas is looking pretty good in 2020.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, they did adding CeeDee Lamb. Obviously he's a huge weapon, and that's going to be something for them. You line him up across from Amari Cooper, and you've got some big time weapons there. But like I kind of look at it, looking at it from an Eagles standpoint, I'm like, okay, well, all right. The coaching staff is the biggest question to me there. By question, I don't mean necessarily bad. I just mean like unknown of how that's going to work out. Mostly because it's just really interesting because, Dallas had their weapons this past year, and I retweeted this earlier today. It was because people were just saying, and I think unfairly, they're like, oh, Jerry went out and got his backup quarterback and paid him before he paid Dak. Well, Dak's going to get paid, that's just the process. And there's a whole bunch of things going on slowing that down. But, Dak will get paid, and I think he's going to get paid by Dallas. But when you look at it, I think, and honestly, that's part of also when you look at what the Eagles could have done. There's guys out there who you could have gone and tried to get as a backup, like veteran guys. Now, I don't know that they necessarily want to be backups, but at the same time, they're probably going to not turn down being in the league over things, like going out and getting Cam Newton or going out and getting, Jameis or Andy Dalton, or now Dalton wasn't technically available, but you knew he might be because they drafted Joe Burrow number 1. But, just going out, that could have been an option for the Eagles as well. But whatever, they didn't go that route. Trevon Diggs is another great pick. I was kind of surprised that they didn't necessarily look for more on the offensive line. I know they've had a really good offensive line the last however many years, but I also know that the last few years they've started to have some issues in terms of injuries and things on the offensive line.
They weren't
that
the
might
same
be something.
Team when Tyron Smith was out of the lineup.
Right. They weren't, and I believe their center just retired.
Travis
now
Frederick,
they drafted a center, but when you draft a center in the 4th round, you don't. I don't know that anyone would expect him to be the starter on day one. Maybe, I don't know, but centers in the NFL, they're all important, because if you've got a weak link, they're just going to line that guy up across from him and you're in trouble. But, center is huge in the NFL, being able to diagnose everything and stuff like that. So that's just, it's a little surprised maybe they didn't address that, or the offensive line in general a little bit more. However, they had a great draft. They really did. But when I try to, and this is just me trying to be the fan, looking at it. Yeah, okay, they addressed the wide receiver thing, but I probably would have said they had the better wide receiving group before the draft too. You know what I mean? So like, I don't necessarily think that necessarily shifts anything in terms of when I'm comparing them to the Eagles. I again, and this is the fan speaking, I'm going to take Wentz over Dak all day, every day. Mostly because I believe in him, but the extra portion, it would be pretty good. Like I'm not a Dak hater other than the fact that he plays for the Cowboys. But I'm going to take every chance to get the bust on him because he plays for the Cowboys. So, I look at it as, while they got some guys, like, I don't know that really much changed in terms of how I would look at their team anyway. CeeDee Lamb is a huge get. But again, outside of that, I don't look at, okay, here's something and I see this shifting the balance. Now that being said, like, I think you could argue that they're the best team in the NFC East, but honestly, you look at it last year, how did they not win the NFC East last year? Like that's, and I know there were issues with the coaching staff and that's been addressed, but man, that's pathetic.
Right. I think you're right. I think it comes down to the coaching staff. I think things just weren't clicking there anymore. They needed a change, and they got it. They're moving on to bigger and better things.
I saw something that said, Andy Dalton, has red hair and was brought in by Jerry Jones to be the backup so he can eventually coach the Cowboys for 15 years of 500 records. And I saw another one. These are all Eagle takes, obviously, but I saw one that CeeDee Lamb is going to wear 88. And somebody's like, "Oh man, CeeDee Lamb wearing the
Michael Irvin, Des Bryant."
Yeah, it said CeeDee Lamb already wearing the Cowboys record on his jersey. So,
well, I
don't know that that's going to be true, but 8-8 would be a failure for this team. But the Cowboys drafted very well, and I have to give it to them because I like to rip on them when they don't get it right. But you're looking at it here. I mean, they drafted good. We'll see how it turns out. Obviously, I hope there's lots of busts on there, and I hope the cap becomes a huge issue. So.
Yeah, that could be the one thing that unravels some of this momentum that maybe they've grabbed recently, but we shall see. So we'll leave the AFC East since we talked about Philadelphia and Dallas, and we'll move to the AFC East. We'll quickly talk here about my Dolphins before doing the Patriots and hopefully very briefly Baltimore and Pittsburgh in the AFC North. But the biggest story for my team in Miami was what were they going to do at 5? Were they going to stay at 5? And we know that they did stick there. They did not trade up. They did not go offensive tackle. They didn't do anything crazy. They got their guy. They went with Tua Tagovailoa at pick 5, which I was very happy about. I'm glad that they didn't overreact. I'm glad they sat there. I'm glad they didn't pass on him just for medical reasons. He has the potential to be a franchise changer. I liked him better than Justin Herbert or Jordan Love. So, and I honestly, I can't even say it always surprises me when a guy has one brilliant year, and that's what Joe Burrow had. I mean, he had like one of the best, if not the best ever year for a college quarterback ever. But I would have liked to see a little bit more production. I know, and the knocks on Tua are about his injury and maybe even the amount of games he played because of it. But going into last college football season, everyone was talking about Tua, and no one, like Joe Burrow was like a mid-round pick at best. Like I was hearing that he was thinking 4th or 5th round, people were saying, because he hadn't done any yet. So is he going to be a flash in the pan, or was he just starting to hit his stride? I don't know, and I don't wish him any ill will. I don't have anything against Joe Burrow. He did it with LSU, not Ohio State, so that makes me happy. But the Dolphins got Tua. I'm ecstatic about that. I hope it works out. I hope he doesn't have injury issues and that we just have to start this all over again in a few seasons. Happy that they addressed the offensive line. 2 of their next 3 picks were offensive linemen. Wasn't a huge fan of Austin Jackson, the football player, at 18. I thought they could have possibly gotten someone different, more polished, more ready to go. And that guy that I really wanted was Cesar Ruiz, who went, I think it was like 4 or 5 picks later to New Orleans, the center from Michigan. He was the guy I really wanted. But after reading an athletic article about Austin Jackson, I hope that he can match his physical play on the field with the guy that he seems to be off the field, because he seems to be an awesome leader, awesome person, and I'm glad that he's a football player for the Dolphins now. The same thing has been said about the competitive nature of Noah Igbinoghene, which it's gonna take a long time for me to figure out how to say that quickly. I thought it was a stretch who they took and the position they were addressing, because cornerback was not a need for the Dolphins, at least on paper. But if you want to stop these talented offensive rosters that are trotting out, 3 dynamic wide receivers, a tight end, a running back, whatever, you need to have guys to cover them. And despite having the highest paid secondary with Xavier Howard and Byron Jones, now they added Noah to probably play in the slot. And, now you've got hopefully 3 great coverage guys that can stop some of these, throw it deep, throw it often type offenses. Robert Hunt from Louisiana may get a chance to earn the right tackle job. If not, he's going to challenge for a guard spot. Miami could be trotting out 5 new players on the offensive line this year, and if not 5 new players, it'll be 5 maybe players that are not playing the same position as they played last year. So a lot of overhaul along the offensive line. I love the Raekwon Davis pick, Miami's 5th pick. They made 5 picks in the top 56 picks. Raekwon Davis was a 3-year starter for Alabama, and while his production...
that's an awesome pick.
Right, his production went down over the 3 years. He's also playing basically nose tackle. Miami desperately needed another guy to plug in there in the middle, whether they play the 3-4 or 4-3 defensive set. Raekwon Davis, I thought, was a great get, pick 56. And then Brandon Jones, a safety from Texas, was Miami's 6th pick in the top 70. And he has the chance to play in nickel and dime packages and definitely excel on special teams. Once you get outside the top 100, you never quite know what you're going to find, but Miami again added to the interior offensive line with Solomon Kinley from Georgia. Georgia may have had their entire offensive line selected in the draft. At least all the ones that were eligible were picked. And he has a chance to be a starter there as well. The Dolphins signed Ted Karras from New England, who was a starter in New England by default because of injury up there. He came to Miami as a free agent. He'll be the starter at center. And like I said, Robert Hunt and Solomon Kinley could possibly win the guard jobs. And Austin Jackson could be your left tackle. And who knows what's going to happen at right tackle. So a lot of upheaval there. But, the Dolphins wanted to find big and ruthless offensive linemen to become a rushing team that can also throw the ball. And Miami didn't have that ability last year because, Ryan Fitzpatrick was their leading rusher. Miami attempted to address that in the offseason by signing Jordan Howard and also then trading a 5th-round pick during the draft to get Matt Breida from San Francisco. So while it wasn't exactly a new draft pick, they used the pick to bring in a known quantity. And Miami rounded things out with a couple rushers, defensive rushers in the towards the end of the 3rd day, in Jason Strawbridge and Curtis Weaver. Curtis Weaver is one of my favorite picks from any team in the draft because there were times, especially early on, people were thinking he could possibly be a 1st-round pick. Now questions arose as they watched game tape, and he seemed to disappear at times, and he's not your prototypical rusher, but he put up massive production at Boise State, so taking a late flyer on him, I thought the Dolphins did a great job with that. The biggest issue people have with Miami's draft is pick 185, which is Blake Ferguson, because he's a long snapper. And Miami just jettisoned their long snapper 2 seasons ago, and now they seem to possibly be replacing the new guy just 1 year into his professional career. So we'll see what happens there, but can't go wrong with picking a Navy guy near the end. At pick 246, Miami took Navy quarterback Malcolm Perry, which I was super happy about. I knew he wouldn't be playing quarterback in the NFL, but we've seen collegiate quarterbacks transition to running back receiver type roles in the past. And, Julian Edelman's made a career out of it, and I would love to see Malcolm Perry do the same, especially if it happens in Miami. But anytime we can get a Navy football player with the Dolphins, I'm happy about that.
Yeah, when you pointed that out pretty quickly, that was pretty awesome though. That's a pretty cool feature there, and I hope Malcolm Perry can work his way into a roster spot because that would be pretty awesome. Yeah, Miami killed it, man. They had so many picks, like you said. They got their guy at number 5, and honestly, if that's the guy they wanted, that's awesome because then you don't even have to worry about did we pick the right guy? In terms of Burrow or Tua, like Cincy has to not worry, not that they have to, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
Cincinnati
Cincinnati's going to be
has some
wondering
of that.
forever if it
Right.
goes wrong.
Right. If it goes wrong. Whereas Miami took the next guy. Like, I think, especially if Tua plays, if he can play normally and be healthy and everything, which every indication is that he can. It's just a matter of if he will. And obviously no one can know that. But yeah, to get your guy at number 5 there, that's incredible. And I like that they stayed put and they didn't panic and try and get up and move up and worry about it. No, they stayed pat at 5 and then were able to keep adding in those pieces, which is awesome for them because they have another boatload of picks next year too. So.
Yeah, to already have, without making any trades or anything, they already have 2 firsts and 2 seconds. So, they have another offseason of free agency and another, most likely 4 picks in the top 50 or 60 at worst, and they should be on the rebound. I think they'll be pretty decent this year. I'm not sure they're going to push for the playoffs, but I think they'll be better. So I'm excited to see what another year brings. So staying in the AFCs and looking at New England, everyone thought maybe they would look to take a quarterback, and when Jordan Love was still available late, maybe New England would trade up, take a flyer. We didn't see that happen. It was Green Bay, and New England actually didn't take any quarterbacks at all. They seemed content on rolling with Brian Hoyer.
That's wild.
Or Jarrett Stidham. So
yeah.
That was certainly something when it came to New England. Of course, everyone was talking about how New England, like we predicted, Justin, would trade out of the first round, and they dropped down to pick 37. And New England's head coach, Bill Belichick, he didn't make the pick. His dog, Nike, made the pick of Kyle Duggar, the safety from an FCS school, Lenoir Rhine. And that's a very, very Belichick pick. Defensive back from a smaller school, not in the first round.
Yep.
That just screams Bill Belichick.
Right, exactly.
Of course, Kyle Duggar will go on to be like a 5-time Pro Bowler now. And as soon as he leaves New England to sign somewhere else, he'll be a nobody. That's just the way it happens. Right. I do love their second pick, Josh Hughes, the rusher from Michigan. He was one of my favorite edge rushers in the draft, and of course he went to New England because, of course, they doubled down with the edge rusher, them getting an Alabama rusher and Anthony Jennings, another guy that I really liked. So I'm sure those two will be terrorizing the AFC for years to come now, which is wonderful. I can't say too much else really jumped out at me of being, definite impact, at least this season. Players, Duggar, Hughes, and Jennings, I think will have the potential, and the tight ends. One of the tight ends maybe to step up, and Devin Asiasi or Dalton Keene, but I don't know. I don't think it was an amazing draft, but it really is hard to talk negatively about New England until they start to play poorly.
Right, and the same thing here, like you said, there are a bunch of guys here that we don't know that we'll watch and over the next year or two are going to become key players for them. And maybe not like superstars, but they're going to be in the lineup and they're going to be playing. And so I'll worry about their draft when they're not playing well, like you said. But until then, Bill still gets the benefit of the doubt. And again, they aren't immune to bad picks like everyone, and no one is. But they also, I'm not sure anybody makes more out of their unsuspecting picks. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah. No,
I feel like at the top end of the draft, New England is pretty much the same as everyone else in terms of they hit on the same amount and they miss on the same amount. But like, it's the other guys, the guys who you're like, oh yeah, sometimes it's the guy you knew in college, but like, you're like, I don't know how he's going to be in the pros, and New England picks him and you're like, I guess he's going to be pretty good. Like they make more out of their mid round and late round guys than the other teams. And that's when you fill out your roster, and that's how you become successable. And that's,
right.
Cause New England will always find a way to have that other guy. They'll add the free agent, now again, they do weird things in free agency sometimes, but they're not afraid to make moves to try and make it happen. So,
all right, before we wrap it up here, let's quick give a reaction to the Baltimore draft, which was another solid draft. Dallas got rave reviews. I know Cleveland also received rave reviews, but I believe everyone really liked Baltimore's selections as well. They made a bunch
yeah,
of picks, 10 in all, but it was the ones early in the draft that stood out. They grabbed another great linebacker in Patrick Queen from LSU. He just fills in that role, and people talk
right.
about him being in the same mold as Ray Lewis. I have a lot of remarks about that, but I won't say anything as we're running low on time. Not all of them negative, obviously, because when you can compartmentalize and just look at his play on the field, he's obviously an incredible talent. But yeah, Patrick Queen, that was their first round pick at number 28, and then they made a bit of a surprise pick. Not that it's a bad pick, but just a little bit surprising to go a running back at 55 and J.K. Dobbins. They have Ingram there already, and Lamar Jackson is essentially a running back there in their offense with what he
Right.
was able to do last season. Now, reports are that they would like to use 4 rushers, not counting Lamar Jackson, in their offense, and Dobbins was great value at 55. People thought he could go in the mid-20s, late first round. And I really was hoping the Dolphins would take him, and I believe Baltimore picked Dobbins right before Miami's next selection. So I don't know if that would have happened, but Baltimore got Dobbins there. Just overall very solid selections for Baltimore.
Yeah.
And I don't think the Ravens, as long as Lamar Jackson doesn't regress or the NFL doesn't catch up to him and he doesn't, continue to
Right.
improve, Baltimore looks like a team that's probably going to hang around. They got
Yeah.
upset this past season, and I'm sure that's going to boil over and have them coming out of the gate strong whenever 2020 begins.
Right. Exactly. And, I look at it, they got a bunch of guys who I think can help them this year. J.K. Dobbins is going to get carries this year. Patrick Queen is going to be a plug and play linebacker this year. Third round, they got some defensive tackle depth. He's going to play. DuVernay out of Texas is probably going to play some receiver for them. Maybe not, but that's 2 years in a row. I know they drafted Hollywood Brown last year. And this isn't the same level as that, but you're still in the first 2 days picking up a wide receiver. Yeah, Ravens, man. People thought, when they had a changeover in the front office because of some retirements a couple of years ago, that we'll see how they do in the draft now. And coming out of this draft, everybody's like, how did the Ravens still just draft so well? Like,
Right.
how do they?
Yep.
But
Yep.
so.
Yeah, a great overall draft, very strong. Should set them up for years to come. They addressed holes on defense and they added talent on offense. You really can't be upset about what they did.
Can't really ask for much more.
No, yeah, absolutely. So, last but not least, let's talk a little bit about their AFC North rivals, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Not a lot to be said about them because, they only had 6 picks and none in the first round. Of course, that one went to Miami and the Minkah Fitzpatrick deal. But Pittsburgh, didn't have a lot of quantity, but they certainly got quality. I liked Pittsburgh's draft. I think Chase Claypool from Notre Dame, the receiver at 49, can help give Juju some room to operate. And with Ben coming back, I think that could be an instant success. I like their 2 Maryland picks, Anthony McFarland, maybe not the type of running back you were expecting them to get. You thought maybe they'd go with Bruiser, but they instead went with the shifty guy. But I still like Anthony McFarland in college. Same thing for Antoine Brooks Jr., the safety. He was one of my favorites. I hoped Miami could land him later in the draft, but he went to Pittsburgh. And, and then a couple linemen. So all in all, I thought Pittsburgh did well with the 6 picks they had available, especially not having a first rounder. But to get Claypool at 49, I think he fits that Pittsburgh offense to a T.
Well, yeah, and one of the stats that flashed on the screen about the Steelers when they drafted Claypool was, the help that he's going to get for Juju and Ben in that offense, because for the first time, I forget how long, and it might be ever, the Steelers failed to score 28 or more points in a game last year.
Wow.
They did not score more than 28 points in any game, which is that's crazy when you think about it. But when you look at it, Ben played the whole first game, I think, but he was injured in that game. And so, yeah, you look at what the Steelers have, and looking at the draft grades, yes, it's tough, but because they only had the 6 picks and none in the first round. If you look at the bigger picture, if you throw in Minkah Fitzpatrick from that, because they had to give up draft picks for him, and some of those other moves that they made, but they also get Ben back, and so the Steelers, the ceiling is a lot higher than what it was last year once the season got going. But yeah, they weren't able to do a ton here, but I think some of the guys they got will be able to contribute. And I think Chase Claypool is going to be a good pick for them. And I think he could be a very good wide receiver to help complement for Juju, which getting him back on track, it's hard to grade how Juju's season was last year because Ben was out, and they had really nothing at the backup quarterback position to really help any of the receivers.
Right, and then Connor kept getting injured. Like there was no help anywhere, so that made it very, very difficult.
Yeah, I think the Steelers draft is going to be underrated, or maybe not underrated, but like kind of not flashy or anything like that. But I think they did address, and I think you're going to see some of these guys contribute, and I wouldn't expect the Steelers to be down for long. So
I know some were maybe a little bit surprised that they went wide receiver instead of getting more secondary help.
Yeah.
But I think like a few people who have written the draft recaps have said, they are kind of all in on one last try with Ben. We know that the end of the Roethlisberger era is coming, so you need to you need to do what you can, and adding a wide receiver to go with Juju in that offense, and getting a running back in McFarland to go with Connor. They're trying to do what they can to set the Steelers up for one big splash. And think about what they were trotting out at quarterback this past year, and they still ended up going 500 and looked like they were going to pull their annual Pittsburgh thing where they start off strong, play terribly, and all of a sudden they're in the AFC Championship.
And in the new playoff format, would have been a playoff.
They would have been right. They were the first team out. They were on, and looking back on it, I think they said going back, what was it, like 10 years or something, the Steelers would have made the playoffs 3 more times. They were the last the first team to miss like 3 other times.
Yes, pretty much every year that they didn't make it, they would have.
Yeah, essentially. So they're going to see a huge benefit if that trend continues. But we'll see what happens as we saw Eli hang it up. Phillip Rivers has now moved on and is ready to hang it up, I'm sure, in the next year or 2 as well. Who knows what's going on with Ben? He's had much more issues with injuries than either Eli or Rivers have.
And I think, right. I think this year's a big year for him. Like if they compete, if they make the playoffs again, then obviously he's not going anywhere. I don't think, if they struggle and they miss the playoffs, and if, the Ravens kind of rule the AFC North, it'll be interesting. I think the big thing here for the Steelers in terms of big picture is, do the Browns make the strides that people thought they were going to make, last year? And how long does it take Cincinnati to turn it around if they turn it around? Because all of a sudden you went through the Ravens had a few down years, where they were still competing for playoff spots, but not really serious contenders a lot of the time. The Browns were terrible and the Bengals were terrible. Well, all of a sudden, if everybody's competition, that changes things too. So
yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Especially if you're the one in that group that has the old quarterback, so that you look, the other 3 teams have young quarterbacks that they're building around, and you've got the old one that it just changes the game, especially in terms of the salary cap in those situations at this point too. So.
Yeah, and you know what? We're gonna sign off here and be done, but we're not obviously done talking professional football. We are going to.
It'll make its way back.
Well, actually, we're going to be off next week. We're going to celebrate Mother's Day with the important women in our lives, so we're not going to have a show next weekend. I do want to say that JMNJR Radio will not be silent, however, though, as a podcast that I'm working on with my wife, Kelly, is set to debut next Sunday. Now, we're not streaming it live. There won't be a live video next Sunday, but Justin knows about this. Kelly and I have been working on a podcast on the movie Twister, and we're doing a minute-by-minute breakdown of the movie. So each episode will document 1 minute of the movie, and we've recorded a handful of shows already, and those are going to start to be available on May 10th, which is Mother's Day, a week from now, and just so happens to be the 24th anniversary of the release of the movie Twister.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So look forward to that. Hopefully we can record a few more times. We'd like to have a good, 6-7 episodes available when it debuts a week from now, and hopefully can update with an episode or two every week. So we're looking forward to continue to do that. And then Justin and I will be back 2 weeks from now, May 17th. And you know what we're going to start that weekend, Justin?
Is that our preview for the season?
The NFL preview starts Sunday, May 17th. 2020 NFL preview, starting with the NFC West on episode 306, 2 weeks from now, and we are plotted out to cover each division week by week. We'll have 5 consecutive weeks where we cover the NFC West, NFC South, AFC South, and NFC North before taking a break for Bulldog Hour and then the 4th of July weekends around there. We'll pick it up with AFC North, NFC East, AFC East, and Super Bowl for 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden it's August and we're on Bulldog Hour full time. So while it may only be May 3rd right now as we speak, the football season is hopefully rapidly approaching. I know this week the NFL is set to release the schedule for this year, a full 17-game slate. And I know that they have contingencies in their pocket, but right now the hope is to start on time with 17 games. I believe that's supposed to be released Wednesday or Thursday this week.
Yeah. Oh man, it's such a mixed bag of emotions as like the NFL schedule's coming out and all those things. Like, because by mixed bag, I just mean like, oh my gosh, I want it to happen.
Right.
But at the same time, like, I don't want to get my hopes up, understanding that it's going to happen when it happens, I should say. You know what I mean? But I would love for all those things to be able to start on time. I just don't want to like set my mind that that's exactly how it's going to pan out, because that just isn't a good idea, right?
Yeah.
So
we shall see. So, any shout outs for you before we go?
Happy birthday to my mom today, actually. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yes. Happy birthday to Cheryl, and hopefully it was a good one. We gave a positive reviews to the Ravens, so she should be happy about that. Actually, I think she was commenting on the video. So yeah. Well, there you go. That she doesn't have to go to bed with a frown on her face, knowing that we were poo-pooing the Ravens, which we tend to do from time to time.
Yeah.
But now that Joe Flacco's not there, I
exactly.
don't feel the necessity anymore. So
Right.
But
one quick thing about the draft. My son was so into it, and it was great. But it's already like, when the Eagles didn't draft the player he wanted, because he went before. This has nothing to do with Jalen Hurts. KJ Hamler went to Denver instead of to the Eagles, and my son was crushed and said, he was like, but I'd been dreaming about this since I was 4, which is not exactly accurate. But I love that he was so invested in it. And honestly, being hopefully a Philadelphia fan as he's developing those, get used to the heartbreak early, kid. So
yeah, that's right. That's right. Although if KJ was going to go to a team, that probably would be second best, wouldn't it?
That is literally what I told him. I'm like, dude, like that is honestly, if he's not going to the Eagles, that's where I want him to go. My sister lives out there. We can get the jersey,
Right.
We'll make it work.
It won't be
buddy.
weird,
Don't worry.
just be wearing,
right.
You don't have don't be like me who just would buy whatever team a Penn Stater went to, even though if they had no relation to family or anything. This one is at least there's a link there. So
Yes, exactly.
yeah, well, excellent. So thanks for joining me to talk about the NFL draft. Have a good week. We will be back in 2 weeks to start our NFL preview. Looking forward to it. Obviously, we'll be able to talk about who teams are playing when. So that's going to be great. So thanks for joining us on episode 305 of the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show. For Justin Raffoff, I'm Joe Mays. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
That's a wrap on this episode of the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show, brought to you by Mays Sandwich Shop. Woo-hoo! You can watch each weekly episode live on Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube. Be sure to like, follow, or subscribe to the show on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play. You can also rate and review us on many of these platforms as well. We'd love to hear from you. Send your emails to the Mays Sandwich Shop inbox at joemaysandjraff@gmail.com. The Joe Mays and J-Raff Show is a part of the JMNJR Radio Network, home to other productions such as the Bulldog Hour, Tangents with Friends, and Nat Chats with Dad. Until next time.